Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back, to a time when life wasn't just hard, it was, well, medievally hard. Imagine waking up not to the gentle hum of your alarm, but to the persistent gnawing of hunger in your gut and the damp chill seeping through the cracks of your hovel. You're not reaching for your phone to check emails, you're reaching for a rough spun tunic that smells faintly of stale sweat and wood smoke. This isn't a cozy historical drama you're binging on. This is your life. And frankly, you probably wouldn't last a week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere, drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always wild to see where these stories reach. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first sliver of gray light, thin and hesitant, filters through the smoke-stained opening you call a window. It's not a pane of glass, of course, that's a luxury for the Lord and his ilk. It's just an unglazed slit, covered with a piece of oiled animal hide, doing little to keep out the biting morning air. You shiver, pulling the coarse wool blanket tighter around your shoulders, but the warmth is fleeting, a ghost of comfort in the perpetual chill of your existence. The straw pallet beneath you rustles, a symphony of tiny, unseen creatures that share your meager dwelling. You can almost feel them, scurrying, breeding, living their own tiny, squalid lives in the darkness that clings to the corners of your world. A groan escapes your lips, not of pain, but of pure, unadulterated weariness. Every muscle aches, a dull throb that has become a constant companion. It's the kind of ache that settles deep in your bones, a legacy of endless toil and the ever-present threat of disease. You push yourself up, the straw crunching under your weight, and swing your legs over the side of the pallet. The packed earth floor is cold against your bare feet, a jolt that momentarily sharpens your senses. You stand, stretching, your back protesting with a series of pops and cracks that sound far too loud in the pre-dawn stillness. Your home, if you can even call it that, is a single room, roughly hewn from timber and daub, with a thatched roof that leaks in heavy rains. A crude wooden table, scarred and stained, occupies the center, surrounded by two equally crude stools. In one corner, a small, smoldering fire pit offers the only source of heat, its smoke stinging your eyes and coating everything in a fine layer of soot. A few meager possessions hang from pegs on the walls, a worn leather jerkin, a pair of patched breeches, and a short, blunt knife that serves a multitude of purposes, from cutting bread to sharpening a stick. This is the sum total of your worldly goods, a testament to a life lived on the absolute fringes of society. You move towards the fire, stirring the embers with a stick until a few reluctant flames flicker to life. The faint warmth is a small mercy. You pick up a piece of stale, hard bread, left over from yesterday's meager meal, and gnaw at it. It's dry and tasteless, but it fills a small corner of the emptiness in your stomach. There's no ale, no milk, just a dipper of cold, murky water from the communal well. You drink it slowly, trying to savor the brief moment of hydration, knowing that every drop is precious. As you eat, your mind begins to stir, reluctantly turning to the day ahead, and what a day it promises to be. You are an assistant to the town executioner, a role that places you firmly at the bottom of the social hierarchy, even below the lowest serf. Your job is not just unpleasant, it is, by its very nature, an affront to all that is considered decent and clean. You deal with death, not in the noble pursuit of battle, but in the grim, methodical application of justice, or what passes for it in these dark times. The executioner, Master Thorn, is a man of few words and even fewer emotions. His face is a roadmap of hard lines and shadows, his eyes as cold and gray as a winter sky. He took you on years ago, a scrawny orphan with nowhere else to go, and taught you the grim trade. He taught you how to sharpen an axe until it gleamed with a deadly edge, how to tie a noose that would snap a neck clean, and, perhaps most importantly, how to detach yourself from the humanity of your victims. It's a lesson you've struggled with, a constant battle between the revulsion in your gut and the necessity of survival. Today, there's a hanging scheduled, a petty thief caught with a stolen loaf of bread. A trivial crime, perhaps, but in a world where hunger gnaws at every belly, it's a crime that demands a harsh example. The gallows stands stark against the morning sky, a grim silhouette on the edge of the town square. You helped Master Thorn erect it yesterday, the rough timbers heavy in your hands, the smell of fresh-cut wood mingling with the faint, lingering scent of blood from past executions. It's a smell you've come to associate with your life, a constant metallic tang that seems to cling to your clothes, your skin, even your very soul. You finish your bread, brushing the crumbs from your tunic. It's time to prepare. Your first task is to fetch the tools. They are kept in a small, locked shed behind Master Thorn's house, a place that even the bravest children avoid. The shed is dark and damp, filled with the implements of your trade axes, ropes, branding irons, and a variety of other more specialized tools that you'd rather not think about. You pick up the heavy executioner's axe, its blade dulled by use, but still formidable. You run your thumb along the edge, a shiver running down your spine. It will need sharpening. Sharpening the axe is a ritual, a silent communion with the instrument of death. You carry it to the grinding stone outside the shed, a large, flat slab of rock that has seen countless blades honed to a razor's edge. You pour a little water onto the stone, creating a muddy paste, and begin to work, the rhythmic scrape of metal against stone filling the morning air. It's a monotonous task, but one that demands precision. A dull blade means a messy job, and a messy job means more suffering, more screams, and more blood. You work steadily, your muscles burning until the blade gleams, reflecting the weak morning light with a cold, unforgiving shine. As you work, your mind drifts, a common occurrence in the quiet moments before the grim work begins. You think of the thief, a faceless figure in your mind, reduced to the crime he committed. You wonder about his life, his family, the circumstances that led him to steal a loaf of bread. Was he desperate? Was he starving? These are questions you dare not voice, questions that would only serve to complicate the cold, hard reality of your existence. You are merely a cog in the brutal machine of medieval justice, a silent, unseen hand that carries out the will of the powerful. A common historical fact about this era, often overlooked in the grand narratives of kings and battles, is the sheer brutality of everyday life. Life expectancy was incredibly low, often not much more than 30-35 years, and a significant portion of the population never made it past childhood. Disease, famine, and violence were constant companions, shaping every aspect of existence. So, while you might complain about your commute, imagine if your daily stroll to work involved navigating open sewers, dodging stray pigs, and trying not to step in human waste. It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? You finish sharpening the axe, wiping the blade clean with a piece of rough cloth. Next, the ropes. You check them for fraying, for any weakness that might compromise their grim purpose. The hemp is stiff and rough against your hands, smelling faintly of tar. You coil them neatly, ready for use. Then, the hood. A simple sack of coarse cloth, designed to obscure the victim's face, to make them an anonymous figure in the final moments. It's a small mercy, perhaps, or perhaps just another way to dehumanize the condemned. An obscure detail about medieval executioners and their assistants is that they often lived in segregated communities, or on the very outskirts of towns. They were considered unclean due to their constant contact with death and their role in taking human life, even if it was sanctioned by law. This social ostracization meant they often married within their own families or with other outcasts, creating a small, isolated caste of individuals who performed society's most gruesome tasks. So, while you might feel like an outsider at a family gathering, at least you're not being actively shunned by the entire village because of your job. It's like being the guy who always brings the fruitcake to the potluck. But on a much, much more extreme level, as you gather the tools, the sun begins to climb higher, casting longer shadows across the muddy ground. The sounds of the town slowly awaken the distant lowing of cattle, the barking of a dog, the faint murmur of voices. Soon, the square will fill with people, drawn by the morbid spectacle of a public execution. They will come to gawk, to cheer, to jeer, to witness the raw power of the law in action. And you, the executioner's assistant, will be there, a silent, almost invisible presence. Performing your duties with grim efficiency, you carry the tools back to Master Thorn's house, placing them carefully by the door. He'll be up soon, ready to begin the final preparations. You can already feel the tension building in the air, a palpable hum of anticipation that precedes every execution. It's a feeling you've grown accustomed to, a strange mix of dread and a detached sense of purpose. You are a part of this, an essential component of the macabre theater that is medieval justice. One academic debate that still lingers among historians is the true purpose of public executions in the Middle Ages. Were they primarily about deterring crime, a stark warning to potential lawbreakers, or were they more about demonstrating the power of the ruling authority? A theatrical display of control over life and death. Some argue that they served as a form of communal catharsis, allowing the populace to vent their frustrations and fears. The truth, like most things in history, is likely a complex blend of all these factors. A grim tapestry woven from fear, power, and the desperate need for order in a chaotic world. You take a moment to look at your hands. They are calloused and rough, stained with dirt and the faint, indelible mark of your trade. These hands, which have helped build gallows, tie nooses, and clean up the aftermath of countless deaths, are the instruments of your survival. You clench them into fists, feeling the familiar ache in your knuckles. This is your life. This is your burden. And as the sun rises higher, casting its indifferent light upon the world, you know that another day of unspeakable tasks awaits. The stench of fear, the cries of the condemned, the silent judgment of the crowd. It will all be a part of your grim routine. You are the assistant, the shadow behind the executioner, and your existence is as bleak and unforgiving as the medieval landscape itself. You wonder, briefly, if there is any escape from this life, any path that doesn't lead back to the gallows. But the thought is fleeting, quickly extinguished by the cold, hard reality of your circumstances. There is no escape. Not for you. The damp chill of the morning clings to you as you walk towards Master Thorn's small, unassuming house. It's set apart from the other dwellings, not by choice, but by unspoken decree. No one wants to live too close to the man who deals in death, nor to his humble assistant. The air is still, save for the distant crow of a rooster and the rustle of dry leaves under your worn boots. Each step echoes in the quiet, a solitary rhythm in a world that feels both vast and incredibly confining. You find Master Thorn already awake, hunched over a steaming bowl of something indistinguishable, though the faint aroma of cooked grains suggests porridge. He grunts a greeting, not bothering to look up. His face, etched with lines that seem deeper in the dim light, tells a story of 1,000 grim mornings, 1,000 condemned souls. He is a man accustomed to the weight of his profession, a burden he carries with a stoicism that borders on the chilling. You've never seen him laugh or even genuinely smile. His expressions range from grim determination to a detached indifference that is, in its own way, more unsettling than outright malice. Axe sharpened, he asks, his voice a low rasp, like gravel scraping against stone. Aye, master. You reply, your voice a little hoarser than usual. You place the sharpened axe, the coiled ropes, and the hood near the door, ready for him to inspect. He casts a quick, discerning glance at them, a silent nod of approval. He trusts your work, even if he rarely offers praise. In this line of work, competence is assumed, and mistakes are, quite literally, fatal. Your apprenticeship under Master Thorn began abruptly, almost a decade ago. You were a scrawny, half-starved orphan, caught pilfering a turnip from a market stall. Instead of the usual punishment, a beating, perhaps a stint in the stocks, Master Thorn, who happened to be passing by, saw something in your desperate eyes, or perhaps he simply saw a potential pair of hands. Cheap labor for a profession no one else dared to touch. He offered you a choice: the gallows as a thief, or the gallows as an apprentice. It wasn't much of a choice, what was it? From that day on, your life became a grim education in the art of human termination. You learned to distinguish the different types of wood best suited for the gallows: oak for its strength, pine for its malleability. You learned the precise knots needed to secure a noose, knots that would either snap a neck cleanly or leave a man to slowly strangle, depending on the desired effect, or the mood of the judge. You learned the weight of a man, the resistance of flesh, the sickening thud of a falling body. Master Thorn taught you with a detached thoroughness, like a craftsman teaching his trade. He showed you how to clean the instruments of your work, how to oil the axe blade to prevent rust, how to keep the rope supple. He explained the anatomy of the neck, the importance of the drop, the delicate balance between mercy and spectacle. He never moralized, never expressed remorse. For him, it was simply a job, a necessary evil in a world filled with chaos. And you, his apprentice, absorbed it all, the details seeping into your very being, becoming a part of your grim reality. Today, your first lesson as an active participant will involve the preparation of the condemned. After Thorn finishes his meal, he rises, his movements slow but deliberate. He picks up the axe, tests its edge with a calloused thumb, and gives another silent nod. "Come," he rasps, heading out the door. You follow, the cold seeping into your bones despite your thick tunic. The short walk to the town square is already more animated than before. A small crowd has begun to gather, their hushed whispers mingling with the rhythmic clatter of distant carts. The gallows stand tall and stark in the center, a crude monument to power and fear. The wood smells fresh, mingled with the faint, lingering scent of previous occupants. You approach it, your stomach clenching with a familiar knot of dread. This feeling never truly goes away, no matter how many times you face it. It's a subtle reminder of the profound gravity of what you do, a whisper of the life you are about to help extinguish. Your first task is to ensure the platform is stable, that the trapdoor is functioning smoothly. You clamber onto the wooden structure, checking the hinges, kicking at the supports. The wood groans slightly under your weight, but holds firm. Master Thorn watches, his arms crossed, a silent sentinel. He trusts you to do this right. A faulty gallows means a botched execution, and a botched execution means a furious crowd, potentially even a riot. The common historical fact here is that medieval executions were far from precise. While the ideal was a quick death by neck break, often it involved slow strangulation, dismemberment, or even burning, depending on the crime and the method. Death by hanging, in particular, was often a long and agonizing process. Think about it: no modern medical precision, just brute force and simple physics. It's enough to make you appreciate even the most irritating modern-day bureaucracy. At least it's not a direct threat to your windpipe. Right? Once the gallows are confirmed to be sound, you descend, turning your attention to the rope. Master Thorn takes one end, and you the other. Together, you hoist it over the crossbeam, threading it through the carefully carved notch. You then tie the noose, a specific knot that Master Thorn taught you. A hangman's knot, designed to tighten efficiently under weight. Each turn of the rope feels heavy, imbued with the grim purpose it will soon serve. You pull it taut, testing its strength, ensuring there are no weak points. The rough hemp chafes against your hands, leaving faint red marks. As you work, you notice the subtle shifts in the crowd. They are growing, a silent, expectant throng. Faces stare, some with morbid curiosity, others with righteous anger, and a few, you imagine, with genuine sorrow for the condemned. You try not to meet their eyes. To do so would be to acknowledge their judgment, their fear, their revulsion. You are the executioner's assistant, a necessary evil, but an evil nonetheless in their eyes. You are a pariah, living on the margins of their world, performing the tasks they deem too abhorrent to touch. It's like being the designated family member who has to clean out the garage after grandma finally moves out. But instead of dusty boxes, it's human misery. An obscure detail about the medieval executioner's assistant, which is rarely discussed, is their role in post-execution rituals. Often, after the hanging, the assistant was responsible for cutting down the body. This wasn't a simple task, depending on the sentence. The body might be left hanging for days as a public deterrent, exposed to the elements and carrion birds. When it was finally time to remove it, the assistant might also be responsible for dismemberment if the sentence included quartering, or for preparing the body for burial in unconsecrated ground, as those executed were typically denied a Christian burial. It wasn't just about the execution itself, it was about handling the grim aftermath, ensuring the full measure of the law was met, right down to the disposal of the remains. Talk about a job description that includes heavy lifting and extreme biohazard removal. The sun is fully risen now, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on the scene. The air grows colder, a sharp wind beginning to pick up, swirling dust and bits of straw around your feet. A distant drum roll begins, a slow, solemn beat that signals the approach of the condemned. Your heart gives a jolt, a familiar surge of adrenaline. This is it. The moment of truth. You move to the base of the gallows, taking up your position next to Master Thorn. Your role is simple: assist him in securing the prisoner, adjusting the noose, and when the time comes, springing the trapdoor. It's a precise dance of death, rehearsed countless times, each movement calculated for efficiency and impact. You stand ready, your hands clasped in front of you, a silent automaton of doom. The drum grows louder, closer, and then the procession appears. First, the town guard, their rusty armor gleaming dully. Then, the priest, a somber figure in dark robes, clutching a wooden crucifix. And finally, the condemned. It's a young man, barely older than yourself, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with terror. He shuffles forward, his bare feet dragging against the cobblestones, his hands bound behind his back. He's dressed in simple, worn clothes, no different from your own. For a fleeting moment, you see yourself in him? Or rather, the path you narrowly avoided. A wave of murmurs ripples through the crowd as the thief is led to the gallows. Some shout curses. Others remain silent, their faces impassive. You keep your gaze fixed on the ground, a trick Master Thorn taught you to maintain a semblance of detachment. Don't look into their eyes, don't let their fear or their hatred infect you. Just do your job. The priest begins to speak, his voice a low monotone, offering the condemned last rites. The words are lost to you, swallowed by the rising wind and the growing clamor of the crowd. You focus on your breathing, trying to steady the tremor in your hands. This is the hardest part. The moment before, the humanity of the situation is almost overwhelming. The raw fear emanating from the young man a tangible force. It's a peculiar kind of psychological warfare, isn't it? You're meant to be detached, but you're literally inches away from someone facing their absolute final moments. It's like being the world's most morbid stage manager. Master Thorn steps forward, his movements fluid and practiced. He takes the young man by the arm, guiding him up the steps of the gallows. The thief stumbles, and for a split second, his eyes meet yours. They are filled with a raw, desperate plea, a silent cry for mercy that pierces through your carefully constructed defenses. You quickly look away, your stomach twisting. You can't afford to feel, not now. You ascend the steps after them, your role to secure the man to the drop. You grab his arms, guiding them behind his back, securing them with a leather strap. His skin is cold, clammy. He trembles violently, his teeth chattering. You try to work quickly, efficiently, to minimize his suffering and yours. Master Thorn places the hood over the man's head, plunging him into darkness. A muffled sob escapes him, a sound that will haunt your nights. You try to remember Thorn's words. He is not a man, he is a criminal. He is not a person, he is a lesson. But the words ring hollow in your ears. Master Thorn adjusts the noose around the man's neck, carefully positioning the knot just beneath his ear. He checks it twice, his movements precise. You stand ready by the lever of the trapdoor, your hand hovering over the rough wood. The crowd below is completely silent now, an eerie stillness that precedes the climax. Every eye is on the gallows, on the two figures standing beside the hooded man. A scholarly debate that continues to puzzle historians is the extent to which medieval populations genuinely believed in the concept of divine justice as administered through the legal system, particularly regarding capital punishment. Was the public spectacle a reinforcement of faith, or did it subtly sow seeds of doubt when obviously innocent people were condemned? Some argue that the fear of God's wrath and earthly punishment were intertwined, while others suggest that witnessing repeated injustices might have eroded public trust, even if subtly. It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? Did people truly believe that God approved of every single execution? Or did they simply accept it as the harsh reality of their world, a grim necessity for social order? Much like we begrudgingly accept traffic jams, Master Thorn nods, a subtle movement of his head. This is your signal. Your heart pounds in your chest, a relentless drumbeat against your ribs. You take a deep breath, trying to calm your trembling hand. This is it. The culmination of your training, the essence of your job. You push the lever. The trapdoor swings open with a sudden, sickening thud. The sound is shockingly loud in the silence. The hooded figure drops. A sharp crack echoing through the square. A collective gasp rises from the crowd, followed by a sudden rush of whispers. You look down, your eyes instinctively drawn to the body. It dangles there, lifeless, swaying gently in the wind. A macabre pendulum ticking off the seconds of a life extinguished. You stand there for a moment, the weight of what just happened pressing down on you. The crowd slowly disperses, their morbid curiosity sated, leaving you and Master Thorn alone with the grim aftermath. The sun continues to climb, its indifferent warmth doing little to dispel the chill that has settled deep within your bones. The smell of fear, of death, lingers in the air. This is your life, and the lesson is stark and clear in this brutal world. A stolen loaf of bread can cost you everything. The death of the bread thief still hung in the air, a faint metallic tang of blood and fear clinging to your tongue. The crowd had dispersed, leaving the town square strangely empty, save for you and Master Thorn standing beneath the grim shadow of the gallows. The morning sun had shifted to a lighter yellow, illuminating the stark isolation of your position. You were the survivor, but the sense of escape brought no relief. "Help me bring him down," Master Thorn commanded, his voice as dry and devoid of emotion as ever. You stepped forward, your feet heavy. The task of cutting down the dead was a part of the job you never truly grew accustomed to. There was always a guttural resistance within you, a silent protest against the act of touching a freshly deceased body. But you had been trained to overcome it, to turn yourself into a mere, unfeeling instrument. You leaned the ladder against the gallows, carefully climbing the rough wooden rungs. From up high, the town looked small and distant, a world you merely haunted at its edges. As you reached the body, a cold breeze swept through, making the man's clothes flap eerily. He was still warm, a chilling reality that sent a jolt down your spine. You reached out, grasping his legs to steady the corpse. His skin was still pliant, not yet the rigid stiffness you expected. You reached up to loosen the coarse rope from his neck, feeling the rough fibers imprinted on his flesh. There was a terrible bruising, a dark red welt where the rope had tightened. You removed the hood, revealing his pale face, eyes still wide and vacant. staring into nothingness. It was a young face, now distorted by a final agony. A stark reminder that he had once been a man. Master Thorn stood at the base of the gallows, waiting patiently. He had seen this hundreds of times. For him, it was just another part of the job, a continuous cycle of life and death that he had become an integral part of. A common historical fact many don't realize is that, in the medieval period, those executed were often denied burial in consecrated ground. They were typically interred in unconsecrated plots, sometimes even in open fields just outside the city walls, as a final indignity. It's like being completely scrubbed from the social record, even after you've shuffled off this mortal coil. What a way to say, "We really didn't like what you did." You gently lowered the body, consigning it to Master Thorn's waiting arms. He took the corpse with surprising ease, as if it weighed no more than a sack of potatoes. Together, you carried the body away from the square, through the still empty streets of the town. Occasionally, a window would crack open, and a fearful face would peek out, quickly withdrawing at the sight of you and your grim burden. You were used to it. You were an outcast, a shadow, and your presence reminded them of the darkest facets of their lives. Your destination was a desolate patch of ground just outside the city walls, a windswept, barren field designated as the burial place for the condemned. There were no gravestones, no markers, just haphazard mounds of earth, the only evidence of the fates of those who had been brought here before. You began to dig, the earth hard and cold, soaked with the dampness of an unslept night. Each swing of the pickaxe was an effort, your shoulders aching from the strain. Master Thorn stood beside you, supervising in silence, occasionally offering a terse comment if you weren't digging deep enough or fast enough. As you dug, your mind drifted back to the trials. You had witnessed many. You had to, for it was part of the process. When you weren't assisting in the executions, you were often required to be present to help the jailers or to ensure the tools were prepared. You had seen the accused, sometimes frail old men and women, trembling before a stern judge, and a jury of grim-faced citizens. Justice in these times was often a swift and brutal concept, with little room for doubt or mercy. An obscure detail about medieval legal proceedings is the practice of ordeals, particularly trial by fire and water. These were irrational methods used to determine guilt or innocence. In a trial by fire, the accused might have to hold a red-hot iron, and the burn would be bandaged. If the wound healed without infection, the person was deemed innocent. In a trial by water, the accused was bound and thrown into water. If they sank, they were considered innocent and quickly pulled out. Hopefully, if they floated, they were considered guilty, as pure water was believed to repel the guilty. No wonder your job roster was always full, right? It was a deadly lottery with the statistics stacked against you. It's like trying to win a game where you don't even know the rules, and every round is an elimination round. You had seen the terrified faces of men and women accused of witchcraft, sometimes frail old women blamed for a crop failure or strange illness. You had witnessed traitors, those who had conspired against the Lord, condemned to be drawn and quartered. Each verdict was another brick in the wall of horrors you inhabited. Do you remember the way you felt when you were doing a presentation in school, and you just knew you were going to bomb? Now imagine if bombing meant you were going to be dragged by horses. The pit was deep enough, a crude rectangle in the cold earth. You climbed out, brushing the dirt from your clothes. Together with Master Thorn, you gently lowered the body into its makeshift grave. He lay there, a solitary figure in the dark pit, now blending with the very earth he had tried to steal from. Master Thorn said nothing, merely giving a curt nod. You began to shovel the earth back in, each scoop a final, definitive act, a silent goodbye. The dirt fell with a dull thud, filling the pit, covering the last traces of the man's existence. When the task was complete, only a small mound of earth remained, unmarked. It would sink with time, forgotten, just like countless others who had ended their journey here. You dusted your hands, feeling the grittiness of the soil clinging to your skin. This was one of the worst parts of the job, the complete anonymity and erasure. He was not just condemned to death, he was condemned to oblivion. An academic debate that still remains open is the extent to which public execution served as an effective deterrent or merely a brutal form of entertainment for the masses. Historians still argue whether the sight of horrific death truly curbed crime or simply desensitized the public to violence. Some argue that the fear of a gruesome end must have had an effect, while others point out that crime remained rampant, and executions might have just become a form of blood sport for bored peasants. What do you think, does watching a horror movie make you less likely to walk down a dark alley? Or does it just make you want another horror movie? You turned your back on the fresh grave, leaving the nameless man to the silent company of the earth. The air, once thick with the expectation of death, now felt empty, echoing with the silence of a life extinguished. You had performed your duty, executed the verdict, and buried the condemned. It was a cycle that would repeat, day after grim day, etching deeper lines into your soul. And as you walked back towards the town, the image of the young man's wide, terror-filled eyes lingered, a persistent ghost in the back of your mind. The walk back to Master Thorne's house felt longer than the walk to the burial ground. The early morning chill had given way to a weak, watery sun, but its light did nothing to warm the lingering cold in your bones. The town, which had seemed so quiet just hours before, was now stirring. The rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoed in the distance, mingling with the distant chatter of merchants setting up their stalls in the market square. For a moment, you almost forgot the grim task you had just completed, almost slipped back into the mundane rhythm of everyday life. But then, a fleeting glance from a passing woman, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disgust, pulled you back to the harsh reality of your existence. You were, after all, the executioner's assistant, carrying the invisible stain of death on your very being. You arrived back at Master Thorne's, the tools heavy in your hands. Your next task was the most unpleasant, the one that truly set your stomach churning. The cleaning. Not just the tools, but the ground, the very air where the execution had taken place. There was a lingering scent, a faint, sickly sweet odor that you had learned to associate with the release of a soul. Or perhaps simply the bodily fluids that accompanied a violent death. You began with the axe. You carried it to a small, secluded well behind Thorne's house, one that was rarely used by others. You knew why. The water, clear and cold, was meant to wash away the grime, but it could never truly cleanse the axe of its purpose. You plunged the blade into the bucket, scrubbing vigorously with a stiff brush. The water quickly turned murky, tinged with a faint reddish hue. You scrubbed until your arms ached, until the steel glinted with a cold, almost sterile shine. The wooden handle hunt, however, retained its dark, sticky patina, a testament to countless hands, countless deaths. Next, the ropes. You untangled them, laying them out on the rough ground to air. They still held the faint scent of hemp, and you imagined the lingering essence of human fear. You ran your hand along the coarse fibers, feeling the slight indentation where the noose had tightened. You would inspect them later for any fraying, any weakness that might compromise their grim utility. In this trade, every detail mattered. A frayed rope could lead to a drawn-out, agonizing death. A brutal spectacle that would displease the authorities and enrage the crowd? And that, surprisingly, was something to be avoided. A common historical fact about medieval executioners is that they were often responsible for a wide range of duties beyond just putting people to death. They might also serve as torturers, enforcing confessions through various painful methods, or even act as public physicians, performing gruesome operations like setting broken bones or amputations, often without anesthesia. Of course, so if you thought your job had a lot of unexpected responsibilities, imagine having to transition from Say, public speaking to performing open heart surgery with a blunt knife. Talk about a diverse skill set. Your least favorite part of the cleaning process involved the site of the execution itself. You had to return to the square, armed with buckets of water, brushes, and strong lye soap. The faint reddish stains on the wooden platform and the cobblestones, subtle as they were, had to be removed. You poured water, scrubbed with the lye, feeling the caustic soap burn slightly against your skin, a sensation you had grown accustomed to. You worked methodically, each stroke of the brush an attempt to erase the physical evidence of what had transpired. But the memories, the images, those were far harder to scrub away. As you worked, the square slowly filled with life again. Merchants set up their stalls, their voices calling out their wares. Children, oblivious to the lingering scent of death, chased each other, their laughter sharp and clear in the morning air. You tried to remain unnoticed, to blend into the background, but you were always aware of the glances, the subtle shifts in conversation as people realized who you were, what you were doing. You were the untouchable, the living embodiment of the town's darkest necessity. It's like being the person who brings the suspiciously large and heavy casserole to the potluck, and everyone is wondering what exactly is in it. An obscure detail about the medieval executioner's assistant, especially regarding the disposal of bodies, is their role in gathering any items that fell from the condemned. Sometimes, small personal effects, a coin, a token, a religious charm, would drop during the final moments. These items were not considered property of the dead or their families. Instead, they often became the perquisites of the executioner and his assistant, a small, grim bonus for their services. This wasn't a universal rule, and it was certainly not a fortune, but it offered a tiny, morbid incentive in an otherwise thankless profession. Imagine your boss saying, "Great job, here's your bonus." It's a slightly bloodied button. The work was physically demanding. You hauled heavy buckets of water, knelt on the cold, hard stone, and scrubbed until your muscles ached. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, but the chill within you remained. You worked until the stains were gone, until the stones were clean, at least to the eye. The task was not just about hygiene, it was about public image. The town needed to move on, to forget the grim spectacle of the morning. And your job was to facilitate that forgetting, to erase the evidence, to make way for the everyday bustle of life. It's a bit like being the cleanup crew after a very, very messy party, but instead of spilled beer, it's existential dread. There's a curious academic debate among historians about the psychological impact of repeated exposure to death and violence on medieval executioners and their assistants. Did they become desensitized to the suffering, adopting a purely professional detachment? Or did the constant proximity to death take a deeper, more profound toll, leading to mental health issues like what we might now recognize as PTSD? Some argue that the sheer brutality of the age fostered a hardened psyche, while others suggest that even in such a harsh environment, the human mind would struggle to process such regular trauma without long-term effects. It's an intriguing question, isn't it? Did these men simply become numb? Or did they carry a silent burden of unseen wounds? Once the physical cleaning was complete, you returned to Master Thorne's house. Your next chore involved organizing the various implements of torture and punishment that were also under his care. These were not always used, but they had to be ready at a moment's notice. Chains, stocks, thumb screws, branding irons. Each had its place. Each carried its own chilling history. You carefully arranged them, checking for rust, wiping down the metal with oiled rags. The clinking of metal against metal was a grim soundtrack to your work. You thought about the various methods of punishment. The stocks, simple but humiliating, used for minor offenses like public drunkenness or petty squabbles. The whipping post, a more severe punishment for theft or insolence. And then, the true horrors, the rack, the Iron Maiden, the boiling cauldron. You hadn't personally witnessed the use of these. Not yet. But you knew their purpose, their capacity for unimaginable pain. Your job was to maintain them, to ensure they were always ready to administer the raw, unadulterated justice of the age. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as you finished your work. Your hands were raw, your body weary. You returned to your small hovel, the smell of soap and death clinging to your clothes. The day's grim tasks were complete, but the images, the sounds, the smells lingered. They would follow you into your dreams if sleep managed to find you. You prepared a meager meal, a thin vegetable stew, perhaps, or a piece of hard cheese and bread. You ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling of your small fire and the incessant scratching of unseen vermin. The loneliness was a constant companion, a heavy cloak that never truly left you. You were the one who dealt with the dead, the one who enforced the law's most brutal decrees, and in return, you lived a life of isolation, fear, and a pervasive, aching dread. The work was done, but the burden of it was never truly lifted. The days that followed the execution of the bread thief blurred into a monotonous rhythm of grim duties. You continued to assist Master Thorn, preparing the instruments, cleaning the aftermath, and maintaining the grim inventory of torture devices. Each task, no matter how repetitive, carried the weight of its purpose, a constant reminder of the thin line between order and chaos in this unforgiving age. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, a new kind of preparation began to emerge, one that filled the air with a different kind of tension, the anticipation of a grander spectacle, a public event that would draw not just a handful of curious onlookers, but the entire town and beyond. The word spread slowly at first, whispered among merchants and hushed in taverns, then growing louder, amplified by town criers and the stern pronouncements of the Lord's bailiffs. A major offender, a truly heinous criminal, had been apprehended. Someone whose crimes were so egregious, so utterly an affront to the established order, that their punishment would serve as a profound lesson, a chilling performance of justice for all to witness. The crime itself varied from rumor to rumor. Highway robbery that ended in murder. Conspiracy against the Lord, even heresy. Regardless of the exact transgression, the outcome was the same: a public execution of the highest order. A festival of punishment designed to instill fear and reinforce authority. Your role in these grand events was elevated, more visible, and arguably more terrifying. You were no longer just the silent cleaner. You were a key player in the morbid theater. This meant more time spent at the heart of the town square, ensuring the gallows were not just sound, but imposing. You worked with Master Thorn, inspecting every timber, every rope, every bolt. The structure itself seemed to grow in significance. No longer just a functional tool, but a symbol, a dark monument to the Lord's power. You hauled new, thicker ropes, their hemp fibers stiff and unyielding, ensuring they could bear any weight for any duration the Lord might command. A common historical fact about these large-scale medieval executions is that they were meticulously planned and widely advertised. Think of it like a gruesome holiday event, drawing crowds from miles around. People would travel for days, bringing their families, setting up makeshift camps. It wasn't just about punishment, it was a form of public spectacle, a morbid kind of entertainment that served as a break from the grinding monotony of everyday life. So, while you might be planning your next binge-watching session, imagine if the hottest ticket in town was literally a front row seat to someone losing their head. Puts a new spin on must-see TV, doesn't it? As the day approached, the town began to transform. Stalls appeared selling food and drink, not just for the townspeople, but for the influx of visitors. Minstrels and street performers, usually relegated to the edges of the market, now found a morbid stage, their songs and acts mixing incongruously with the somber preparations. The air thrummed with a strange energy, a blend of excitement and unease. You observed it all from the periphery, a silent observer in the midst of the macabre carnival. People would look at you, their gazes a mix of morbid curiosity and profound avoidance. You were the one who touched death, the one who facilitated the screams, An obscure detail related to these larger executions is the practice of selling relics, or souvenirs. After the event, charlatans and even some legitimate vendors might sell pieces of the gallows wood, fragments of the condemned's clothing, or even bags of dirt from the execution site, all purported to have some kind of power or significance. These items were often believed to ward off evil, bring good luck, or even cure ailments. It's a dark twist on modern-day merchandising. Isn't it imagine leaving a concert with a piece of the stage? Only that stage was where someone just... Well, you get the picture. The night before the main event was always the worst. Sleep became an elusive ghost, haunted by fragmented images of past executions, the silent pleas in the eyes of the condemned, the chilling crack of bone. You'd lie on your straw pallet, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in your hovel, each gust sounding like a distant sigh. Master Thorn, you imagined, slept soundly. His conscience, if he had one, unburdened by the weight of his profession. You, however, were still learning to harden your soul. The dawn of the execution day arrived, not with the hesitant light of ordinary mornings, but with a palpable buzz. The town square was already packed, a sea of faces stretching back as far as you could see. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale ale, and the nervous anticipation that hung heavy like a coming storm. The gallows, now fully prepared, stood tall and imposing, its dark timbers stark against the gray morning sky. You and Master Thorn made your final checks, ensuring every component was perfect. There could be no mistakes today. The procession began with a solemn drumbeat, slow and deliberate, designed to build tension. The sound vibrated through the ground, up through your feet, settling in your chest like a stone. First came the Lord's Guard, their polished armor glinting, their spears held high. Then, the trumpeters, sounding a mournful fanfare that echoed across the square. And finally, the condemned. This was no petty thief. This was a man of some stature, or perhaps notoriety. He walked with a defiant stoop, his head held high despite his bound hands. His clothes, though worn, suggested a life above mere peasantry. He was surrounded by priests, their voices chanting prayers, and a phalanx of guards. The crowd surged forward, a collective gasp rippling through the throng as the criminal was led towards the gallows. Some cheered, a few jeered, but most watched in stunned silence. Their faces a mixture of awe and fear. Your heart hammered against your ribs like a frantic bird trapped in a cage. You kept your gaze fixed on the ground, just as Master Thorn had taught you. But even so, the sheer scale of the crowd, their palpable energy, was overwhelming. It was a terrifying, almost intoxicating experience. Being at the very center of such a profound public spectacle, it was like being the understudy in a play where the stakes were literally life and death, and the audience was the entire known world. The formal pronouncements began. The judge, a stern-faced man in elaborate robes, read out the charges in a booming voice, enumerating the criminal's transgressions. Each word was met with murmurs from the crowd, a collective intake of breath. Then came the sentence, delivered with an almost theatrical flourish, detailing the specifics of the execution, the full measure of the law's vengeance. You stood beside Master Thorn, holding the tools, a silent, grim attendant to the unfolding drama. A common academic debate among historians is the extent to which public executions genuinely reflected the will of the people versus being tools of state control. Were these events a genuine outpouring of collective justice, or simply a theatrical display designed by the powerful to maintain order and suppress dissent? Some argue that the popular participation, the cheering and jeering, indicated a shared sense of justice, while others posit that the crowds were simply manipulated by fear and spectacle. It's like wondering if people at a sporting event are truly invested in the game, or just caught up in the collective energy. As the judge finished, the priest stepped forward, offering the condemned his last rites. The criminal, for all his earlier defiance, now seemed to crumble. His head bowed, His shoulders slumped. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Master Thorn stepped forward, his movements practiced and efficient. You assisted him, helping to guide the condemned onto the platform, to position the noose. The man's skin was cold, clammy to the touch, and you could feel his body trembling violently. He muttered something, a last, desperate plea. Perhaps. But the words were lost in the rising murmur of the crowd. Master Thorn placed the hood over the man's head, plunging him into darkness. The last glimpse you caught was of his eyes, wide with a raw, primal terror that would forever be etched into your memory. You stood ready, your hand hovering over the lever of the trapdoor. The silence of the crowd was absolute now, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on the square. Every eye was on you and Master Thorn, the silent orchestrators of this grim symphony. Master Thorn gave the subtle nod. Your heart pounded, a frantic drum in your chest. You closed your eyes for a fleeting moment, then pushed the lever. The trapdoor sprung open with a deafening crash, and the body dropped. A collective gasp, then a shriek, rose from the crowd. The sound of a neck breaking, sharp and sickening, echoed through the square, followed by the gruesome sight of the body twisting and twitching, a puppet on a string. You stood there, breathing heavily, the adrenaline coursing through your veins. The crowd slowly began to stir, their morbid curiosity satisfied. The festival of punishment had reached its climax, and the lesson, writ large in the swaying form on the gallows, it was clear for all to see. For you, it was another soul sent to its grim end, another stain on your already burdened conscience. The sun continued its indifferent climb, casting long, distorted shadows across the square, making the gallows seem even taller, even more menacing. You had played your part in the grim theater, and the applause, silent though it was, felt like a cold, chilling condemnation. The grand spectacle of the execution faded from the town square, but its shadow lingered, especially for you. The crowds dispersed, the merchants packed up their wares, and the minstrels moved on to the next morbid fair. Yet, for you, the executioner's assistant, the festival of punishment never truly ended. It simply moved from the public stage to the quiet, insidious reality of your daily life. Your existence was one of profound isolation. You lived on the absolute fringes of society, not by choice, but by unspoken decree. Your hovel, already separated from the main dwellings, became even more of a solitary island. People would visibly shrink away as you passed, their conversations dying abruptly, their gazes dropping to the ground. It was a silent, constant condemnation, far more potent than any shouted curse. You were the embodiment of all they feared and all they reviled, a walking reminder of death and societal retribution. You found yourself walking familiar paths, yet always alone. The narrow, muddy streets of the town, usually bustling with life, felt strangely empty around you. Children, who once might have approached with curious stares, now scattered at your approach, their parents quickly pulling them away. It was as if your very presence cast a chilling pall, tainting the air with an unspoken dread. It's like being the person at a party who knows everyone's embarrassing secrets, but instead of secrets, it's about how many people you've seen die. This social ostracization extended to every aspect of your life. Attempts at simple human connection were met with suspicion or outright rejection. A nod from a neighbor, a shared laugh in the tavern. These commonplace interactions were utterly beyond your reach. The innkeepers would serve you one, of course, but always quickly, averting their eyes, wiping down the counter after you left as if to erase your lingering presence. The price of your ale, you suspected, was often subtly higher than for others. A small, passive-aggressive tax on your very being. A common historical fact about medieval executioners is that their isolation was often institutionalized. They were forbidden from participating in many civic activities, denied membership in guilds, and even their children might be barred from certain trades or marriages. This wasn't just informal shunning. It was often enshrined in custom and sometimes even in local laws. creating a distinct, almost hereditary caste of outcasts. So, while you might feel left out of the office bowling league, imagine if your entire family tree was permanently disinvited from everything. Even the natural world seemed to conspire in your loneliness. The stray dogs that roamed the streets, usually bold in their scavenging, would give you a wide berth, their tails tucked. The birds that chattered in the thatched roofs fell silent as you passed. You were a walking taboo, a living embodiment of everything the medieval mind considered unclean and polluting. This constant rejection, this pervasive sense of being an outsider, began to take its toll. You found yourself retreating further into yourself, your thoughts becoming your only companions. You learned to read the subtle cues of avoidance, to anticipate the hushed whispers and averted gazes, so you could preemptively distance yourself, softening the blow of inevitable rejection. It was a grim dance, performed daily, in which you were always the lead in isolation. An obscure detail about the lives of executioners and their assistants is that they sometimes developed highly superstitious beliefs due to their constant proximity to death and their outcast status. They might carry charms, perform obscure rituals, or develop personal taboos to ward off evil spirits or bad luck. Believing that the souls of the condemned, or the very act of execution, could bring misfortune upon them. It's like having a lucky rabbit's foot, but that rabbit's foot is, well, it's best not to think about its origins. Maybe it was just a particularly lucky pebble they found near the gallows. Food became a solitary affair. You would eat your meager meals alone in your hovel, the silence broken only by the crackle of your small fire. The act of breaking bread with another human, a simple pleasure denied to you, became an ache in your chest. You watched from a distance. Families gathered around their tables, their laughter echoing through the thin walls of their homes, a stark contrast to the profound quiet of your own. Work was your only true companion, and even that was grim. You spent your days maintaining the tools, sharpening blades, mending ropes, ensuring that the instruments of death were always ready. Master Thorn, your only regular human contact, offered no companionship. His silence was as profound as your own, his detached demeanor a mirror to the world's rejection. You were two solitary figures bound by a shared, abhorrent profession, adrift in a sea of human contempt. The sheer weight of anonymity pressed down on you. No one truly knew you, nor did they wish to. You were defined solely by your grim occupation. Stripped of any individual identity, you were not just a man, you were the executioner's assistant, a label that preceded you and ensured your isolation. It's like being known only by your worst mistake. But that mistake is your entire job description. Every single day, sometimes in the dead of night, you would hear the faint sounds of celebration from the town, the distant strains of music, the raucous laughter from a tavern. You would lie awake, listening, a profound ache of loneliness spreading through you. You were a part of this community, essential to its grim form of justice, yet utterly excluded from its joys, its fellowship, its very humanity. You were a living ghost, performing a vital but despised service. An academic debate that lingers among historians is whether the social isolation of executioners was a deliberate, functional aspect of medieval society, designed to clearly delineate the boundaries of acceptable behavior, or an unintended consequence of the deeply ingrained fears and superstitions surrounding death. Some argue it was a necessary mechanism for social order, ensuring that those who performed abhorrent tasks remained outside normal society. Others suggest it was simply the natural outcome of popular revulsion, a spontaneous shunning rather than a calculated policy. It's a bit like asking if your annoying neighbor is intentionally trying to bother you, or if they're just oblivious to the chaos they create. The solitude forced you into a deeper introspection than most. You spent countless hours contemplating your existence, the nature of good and evil, the arbitrary cruelty of life and death. You saw firsthand the raw fear of the condemned, the desperate pleas, the final, pathetic struggles. and you saw the indifference of the crowd, the cold detachment of the authorities. This constant exposure to the extremes of human emotion, and the lack thereof, left an indelible mark on your psyche, shaping your worldview in ways that set you even further apart from your fellow villagers. You developed subtle ways of coping with the isolation. You found solace in the quiet solitude of nature, taking long walks beyond the town walls, where no one would recognize you or shun your presence. The rustle of leaves, the babbling of a stream, these were your only companions, offering a fleeting sense of peace that the human world denied you. You learned to observe, to watch the world from a distance, an unseen spectator in a play you could never truly join. Your life was a stark testament to the unforgiving nature of medieval society, a relentless cycle of duty, isolation, and quiet despair. You were the one who helped administer justice, who ensured the order of the realm, yet you were perpetually cast out, condemned to live a life on the very edge of humanity. The weight of your profession, the burden of being the executioner's assistant, was a heavy cloak that you wore every waking moment, and one that seemed destined to accompany you to your own lonely grave. The profound loneliness that clung to you like a shroud was only intensified by another harsh reality of your existence: the relentless struggle for sustenance. Your work, while vital to the grim machinery of medieval justice, was far from lucrative. You were paid. Yes, but your wages were meager, inconsistent, and often barely enough to keep the gnawing hunger at bay. In a world where every morsel was a treasure, your daily life was a constant, exhausting battle against starvation. Your earnings, often just a few copper coins per execution, fluctuated wildly. Some weeks, there would be multiple hangings, branding, or time in the stocks, offering a brief respite from absolute destitution. Other weeks, silence would reign, and your purse would grow painfully light. There was no guaranteed salary, no stable income to rely upon. You lived hand to mouth, always aware of the precariousness of your position, always one missed payment away from true destitution. It's like being a freelance gig worker, but your gigs involve literally dealing with life and death, and your clients are the kind of people you really don't want to upset. Master Thorne managed the finances, doling out your share with the same cold, detached efficiency he applied to every other aspect of his life. He kept the larger portion, of course, for he was the executioner, the master of the craft. Your share was just enough to buy the cheapest bread, the thinnest gruel, and perhaps, on a truly fortunate day, a small piece of salted fish. Meat was a luxury you rarely tasted, a distant memory from a childhood that seemed increasingly like a dream. A common historical fact is that medieval executioners were often paid directly by the town or local lord, and their income could indeed be quite inconsistent. However, they sometimes supplemented their income through various perquisites, small, often gruesome. Benefits of the job. These might include the clothes of the condemned, certain animal parts from executed livestock, or even small fees for performing other tasks like dissections or public floggings. It wasn't exactly a retirement plan, but it helped grease the wheels of a grim existence. So, if you ever complain about your meager tips, just remember, at least you're not getting a used tunic as a bonus. The pursuit of food became a daily obsession. You knew the market stalls, not as a place for pleasant browse, but as a battleground for survival. You would eye the bruised vegetables, the slightly wilted greens, hoping to haggle down a price, to stretch your few coins as far as they could possibly go. The shame of your profession often meant vendors were reluctant to deal with you, their faces grimacing even as they took your coins. You were a walking source of bad luck, a tainted presence, an obscure detail about the medieval executioner's payment. In some regions, was that a portion of their income might come from performing less savory, but necessary, public health duties. This could include tasks like disposing of dead animals, cleaning sewers, or even lancing boils and setting bones for the poor, as many legitimate physicians avoided contact with the lowest classes. These tasks, though unpleasant, sometimes offered a small additional fee, further cementing their status as society's designated handlers of all things foul and undesirable. It's like having pest control specialist added to your resume, but the pests are, well, a little more human-sized. Sometimes, the delay in payment was excruciating. The Lord's coffers might be low, or the town council simply slow to process the grim accounts. You would wait, patiently at first, then with growing desperation, watching your meager stores dwindle. Hunger was a constant companion, a dull, aching sensation that never truly left you. It made you irritable, slow, and perpetually weary. It was a vicious cycle. The less you ate, the less energy you had, and the harder it was to perform your already draining duties. You understood intellectually that your work was necessary. Someone had to do it. Someone had to enforce the harsh justice of the land, to make an example of those who dared to defy the Lord's will. But understanding did little to fill your empty stomach or ease the constant gnawing of uncertainty. You lived with the knowledge that a sudden shift in political winds, a new lord with different priorities, or even just a period of unexpected peace, could strip you of your livelihood entirely. What then back to being a starving orphan? Perhaps only this time with the added burden of your infamous past, a persistent academic debate revolves around whether the low pay and social ostracization of executioners were deliberate attempts to keep them beholden to the authorities, ensuring their loyalty through dependence, or simply a reflection of society's disdain for their necessary but abhorrent role. Some historians argue that by keeping them on the fringes, they could be more easily controlled and used as tools of state power. Others suggest it was a natural social consequence, a reflection of deep-seated fears and prejudices. It's like asking if your boss pays you poorly to keep you motivated, or just because they can get away with it. The very coins you earned felt tainted, heavy with the invisible stain of blood and fear. You would count them out, piece by agonizing piece for a loaf of bread, a handful of dried beans. The meager bounty felt almost mocking. These were the wages of death, and they barely afforded you life. The irony was a bitter taste in your mouth, sharper than the stale bread you often gnawed on. You often wondered what it would be like to earn an honest living, a clean wage. To be a carpenter, perhaps, or a weaver. To work with your hands to create, rather than to destroy. But those thoughts were fleeting, quickly crushed by the brutal reality of your circumstances. You were trapped, bound to your profession by the invisible chains of societal expectation and your own lack of alternatives. Your skills, honed in the grim art of execution, were useless in any other trade. No guild would accept you, no master would take you on. The struggle for food was not just about physical sustenance. It was also a constant reminder of your dehumanization. In a world where status was often tied to one's ability to provide, your chronic poverty further cemented your place at the very bottom. You were less than human in their eyes, and your inability to thrive, to accumulate even a small measure of wealth, only reinforced that perception. It was a bleak, isolating existence, where even the most basic human needs were a constant source of anxiety and shame. It truly made you appreciate the modern marvel of a consistent paycheck, even if it just means you can afford that extra avocado toast, the chill of your hovel, the perpetual hunger in your gut, the rough itch of your coarse clothes. These were the constant sensory reminders of your impoverished existence. You learned to ignore the discomfort, to push it to the back of your mind. But it was always there, a dull ache beneath the surface. Sleep offered little escape, often haunted by dreams of feasting, only to wake to the sharp pangs of hunger. Your life, as the executioner's assistant, was a stark testament to the harsh realities of medieval existence. It was a life defined not by grand adventures or noble deeds, but by the relentless grind of survival, the constant struggle against hunger, and the pervasive shadow of social rejection. And as the meager sun set, casting long, cold shadows across your meager dwelling, you knew that tomorrow would bring another day of the same, another day of earning your grim wages, another day of merely existing, The constant gnawing of hunger and the pervasive chill of your hovel were not the only threats you faced. In the brutal world of the Middle Ages, where sanitation was a foreign concept and medical knowledge rudimentary at best, disease and death were ever-present companions, lurking in every shadow, carried on every breath. For you, the executioner's assistant, your profession only heightened these risks, placing you in constant proximity to the very sources of contagion. Your daily contact with death went beyond the psychological toll. It was a very real, physical danger. Bodies, whether those of the recently executed or discarded by the plague, were often rife with disease. You handled them directly, without the benefit of gloves or any protective gear. Your hands, raw and calloused, were exposed to unseen pathogens, to the very essence of decay. The blood, the bodily fluids, the lingering stench of putrefaction, all were potential vectors for illness. It's like being a modern-day health inspector, but instead of writing up violations, you're directly handling the biohazard, and your only protective gear is a vague sense of dread. The living conditions of the poor only compounded these dangers. Your hovel, like most, was damp, poorly ventilated, and shared with a host of unwelcome inhabitants. Rats, fleas, and lice. These creatures were not just an annoyance. They were carriers of the very plagues that periodically swept through towns, decimating populations. You heard the whispers of the Black Death, the tales of entire villages wiped out, of streets filled with the unburied dead. And you knew with a chilling certainty that you were just as vulnerable as anyone. Perhaps even more so. A common historical fact is that hygiene practices in the Middle Ages were remarkably poor, even by the standards of subsequent centuries. Open sewers ran through streets. Waste was often dumped directly outside homes, and personal cleanliness was largely neglected. This created a fertile breeding ground for a vast array of diseases, from dysentery and typhoid to the notorious bubonic plague. So, while you might complain about having to share a bathroom, imagine if the entire street was the bathroom for everyone. You saw the signs of illness everywhere. The coughs that racked your neighbors, the fevered eyes of children, the boils and sores that erupted on skin. You learned to recognize the subtle shift in a person's demeanor, the telltale signs of the sickness that would inevitably lead to the grave. It was a grim education, one born of necessity and constant observation. You also knew that for you, there was no access to the meager medical help available. Physicians, few as they were, catered only to the wealthy, the powerful. For the likes of you, there was only prayer, superstition, and the grim reality of your body's own resilience, or lack thereof. An obscure detail about medieval plague doctors, though rarely the actual executioners or their assistants, is that they sometimes carried a stick or cane. This wasn't just for support. It was used to examine patients without direct physical contact and to point out areas of infection. For an executioner's assistant, however, the contact was unavoidable. Imagine having to poke at festering sores with a stick, then having to physically move the body, knowing full well what you were touching. It really puts the hands-on aspect of your job into grim perspective. The very air you breathed felt heavy with potential infection. The stench of disease, of unwashed bodies, of decomposing waste, was a constant assault on your senses. You learned to ignore it, to push it to the back of your mind, but it seeped into your clothes, your hair, even your very skin. A constant reminder of the unseen enemies that surrounded you. It's like living in a giant open-air petri dish, and you're the designated stirrer. The constant threat of illness added another layer of fear to your already burdened life. A cough could mean a lingering fever. A fever could mean days of weakness, unable to work. And inability to work meant no pay, which meant no food. It was a terrifying cascade of events, each step bringing you closer to the precipice of utter despair. You clung to what little health you had, knowing it was your most precious and most precarious possession. A prominent academic debate among historians is the extent to which popular superstitions and religious beliefs influenced the understanding and response to disease in the Middle Ages. Did people truly believe that plagues were divine punishment for sin, leading to fatalistic acceptance and less preventative action? Or were there practical, albeit primitive, attempts at quarantine and treatment alongside the spiritual explanations? Some scholars argue for a widespread fatalism, while others highlight evidence of community efforts to combat disease, suggesting a more nuanced interplay of faith and rudimentary public health. It's a bit like asking if people today truly believe bad Wi-Fi is a sign from above, or if they just know it's a router issue. Your body, already worn by manual labor and chronic malnutrition, was ill-equipped to fight off any serious infection. You experienced frequent minor ailments, persistent coughs, aching joints, bouts of stomach sickness. These were the normal course of life for someone in your position, but each one carried the silent threat of spiraling into something far worse. You learned to suppress the symptoms, to push through the pain, knowing that weakness was a luxury you could ill afford. The memory of past epidemics, stories whispered in hushed tones, served as a grim reminder. The empty houses, the abandoned fields, the sudden silence that descended upon a once bustling village. These were the terrifying echoes of the plague. You had seen the carts piled high with bodies, heard the mournful cries of the gravediggers, their voices hoarse with exhaustion. You knew that if the plague truly returned, your own death would likely be swift and anonymous. Just another number in the grim tally. You often wondered about your own mortality. Master Thorne was an older man, his face a roadmap of hard-won survival. But even he was not immune to the ravages of time and disease. You saw the subtle signs of his age, the stiffness in his joints, the occasional tremor in his hands. You knew that one day, he too would succumb, leaving you alone to carry the full weight of the executioner's mantle, or perhaps leaving you to starve, with no one to take his place. The stench of disease, the fear of infection, the constant ache of hunger, these were the invisible chains that bound you as tightly as any man in the stocks. Your life was a precarious balance, constantly teetering on the edge of catastrophe, and as night fell, casting long, dark shadows across your hovel, you knew that even in sleep, you would not be safe from the unseen threats that permeated every corner of your miserable existence. The grim reality of your daily existence, the constant threat of disease, and the gnawing hunger were made even more poignant by the profound human need for connection. You lived a life of enforced isolation, a pariah in the eyes of your community. But even in the bleakest corners of medieval society, the desire for family, for companionship, for a legacy beyond the gallows was a deeply ingrained human yearning. For you, the executioner's assistant, this yearning was a constant, aching void. The idea of a family for you was almost a cruel joke. Who would willingly tie their fate to yours? What woman would choose to marry a man whose hands were stained with blood, whose very presence was considered a harbinger of ill fortune? The thought of courtship, of gentle whispers and stolen glances, seemed as alien as a royal feast. You were an object of fear and disgust, not affection. It's like trying to get a date by leading with, "So, I work with dead bodies and everyone hates me. Want to get some gruel?" Probably not the most effective pickup line. Yet, the longing persisted. You would observe families from a distance, their easy camaraderie, the sound of children's laughter. It was a world you could only ever glimpse, a warm hearth you were forever excluded from. The idea of holding a child, of teaching them, of seeing a reflection of yourself in their innocent eyes, was a poignant dream, one that often brought a silent ache to your chest. A common historical fact about medieval society is that marriage and family were not just about love, they were crucial for social and economic stability. Families were the primary unit of production and social welfare. Being an outcast, unable to marry or form a recognized family unit, meant a complete lack of a social safety net, making your life even more precarious and utterly devoid of the communal support most people relied upon. So it wasn't just about loneliness, it was a fundamental destabilization of your entire existence. Your lineage, if it could even be called that, was a grim inheritance. Master Thorn, your mentor, was the closest thing you had to family, a surrogate father in the art of death. He likely came from a similar background, an outcast himself, trained by another generation of executioners. The profession was often hereditary, passed down from father to son, not as a choice, but as a curse. What would happen if you were to have a child? Would you condemn them to the same life of shame and isolation? The thought was a heavy burden, a moral dilemma that gnawed at your already troubled mind. An obscure detail about the hereditary nature of executioners in some regions is that the sons of executioners might sometimes be leased or apprenticed to other executioners in different towns, establishing a grim network of professional outcasts. This ensured the trade continued and maintained a certain level of skill, but it also meant these children were born into a destiny they could not escape, essentially traded like commodities. It's like being forced into the family business. But the family business is, well, really gruesome. And you're being traded to a branch office in a different, equally judgmental town. The absence of a future, a legacy beyond the grim implements of your trade, was a profound source of despair. Most people hope to leave something behind, a plot of land, a skill passed down, a reputation. You knew your legacy would be one of fear, of whispers, of the chilling tales told to naughty children. Your name, if ever spoken, would only be uttered in hushed tones of disgust and dread. There would be no memorial, no comforting remembrance. A significant academic debate among historians centers on the psychological impact of being forced into such a reviled, hereditary profession. Did executioners and their families internalize the social stigma, leading to self-loathing or profound psychological distress? Or did they develop coping mechanisms, perhaps a strong internal sense of justice or a hardened indifference, to survive their unique social position? Some scholars suggest deep-seated trauma, while others point to evidence of relatively stable communities within these outcast groups, implying resilience. It's like wondering if being constantly told you're bad makes you believe it, or just makes you really good at ignoring what people say. You witness the tender moments of others. A father teaching his son to carve wood. A mother singing to her infant. These were scenes of everyday life, unremarkable to most, but to you they were profound, almost sacred. They represented a world of warmth, acceptance, and continuity that was utterly denied to you. The contrast was a sharp knife to your heart, a constant reminder of all you lacked. The concept of love, in its romantic sense, often was a distant, unreachable star. You had seen young couples, their faces flushed with infatuation, their hands clasped. You had heard the bawdy songs of love and longing in the taverns, songs that felt utterly detached from your reality. Who would ever look at you with desire, with affection? The very thought felt presumptuous, almost absurd. Your touch, you imagined, would be seen as contaminating, your presence as an ill omen. Sometimes, in moments of profound loneliness, you allowed yourself to dream. A tiny cottage, a small garden, the soft murmur of a woman's voice, the laughter of children. These dreams were fragile, easily shattered by the harsh light of dawn and the brutal reality of your day. They were fleeting escapes, offering a brief, bittersweet taste of a life that could never be yours. The very idea of hope for a different future, for a way out of this inherited despair, was a dangerous one. It was a spark that could quickly be extinguished, leaving you with even deeper desolation. You had to suppress it, to focus on the grim, immediate tasks at hand, to survive one day at a time. To hope was to invite crushing disappointment. Your legacy would not be one of bloodline or prosperity, but of tools. The well-oiled axe, the sturdy ropes, the meticulously maintained rack. These were your children, your only lasting testament. They would continue to serve the purpose long after you were gone. silent witnesses to the ceaseless cycle of human cruelty and law. And you, the man who wielded them, would simply fade, another anonymous shadow lost to the annals of a forgotten past. The bitter taste of that reality often settled in your mouth, a perpetual companion to your daily bread. The years, like the relentless cycle of seasons, crept onward, each one etching deeper lines onto your face and into your soul. The sharp pangs of youth's anxieties had mellowed into a dull, persistent ache, the kind that settles in your bones and becomes a constant companion. You were an old man now, or at least old by medieval standards. Your hair, once dark and coarse, was now a thin halo of gray, and your hands, though still calloused and strong, trembled faintly with the tremor of age. The vibrant horrors of your early days had blurred into a monotonous parade of grim duties, each new face on the gallows merging with the countless others that came before. Master Thorn, your stoic mentor, had finally succumbed to the inevitable, not to the axe nor the rope, but to the slow, insidious creep of time and the diseases that plagued every medieval life. He simply didn't wake up one morning, his face as impassive in death as it had been in life. You found him, a silent, solitary end to a silent, solitary existence. You buried him yourself, in the same patch of unconsecrated ground where countless others lay forgotten, a grim testament to the cycle you were both bound to. His passing left you with an odd mix of relief and a profound sense of utter aloneness. He had been your only consistent human contact, however distant, and now even that was gone. You were the executioner now, the sole bearer of the grim title. The tools, once shared, were entirely yours, heavy with the weight of generations of bloody work. The responsibility, once divided, rested entirely on your aging shoulders. There was no apprentice to take your place, no young, hopeful face to train in the gruesome craft. You had ensured that the thought of condemning another soul to this life of isolation and death was more abhorrent than the acts of execution themselves. You had broken the chain, a small, defiant act against the cruel hand of fate. A common historical fact, often overlooked, is that medieval societies, while brutal, did sometimes offer a form of retirement for their executioners, often involving a small pension or dwelling for their final years, particularly if they had served faithfully. However, this was not universal, and for those on the absolute bottom rung, like a long-serving assistant who inherited the title without formal recognition, such provisions were rare. You were likely to simply fade away when your strength failed, replaced without ceremony. It's like being a loyal employee your whole life, and then your retirement package is just the cold, unforgiving ground. The loneliness of your existence intensified with age. Your hovel felt colder, emptier. The glances from villagers, once a mix of fear and disgust, now carried an added layer of pity, a quiet acknowledgement of your impending end. You were a living relic, a remnant of a harsher time, waiting for your own final judgment. The children, bolder now, sometimes pointed, but their fear was less sharp, replaced by a morbid curiosity about the old man who lived by himself, surrounded by whispers of death. An obscure detail about aging medieval executioners, particularly those who operated alone, is that they might often suffer from severe, untreated arthritis and other chronic pains from their physically demanding and often unsanitary work. The constant lifting, swinging heavy axes, and dealing with cold and damp conditions would lead to a slow, agonizing decline in physical capability, making each execution more difficult and painful than the last. Imagine having to perform highly precise, physically demanding work when every single joint screams in protest. It makes your morning creaks and pops sound like a symphony. The grim routine continued, albeit at a slower pace. Your movements were less fluid, your strikes less powerful. Each execution became a physical exertion, a battle against your own weakening body as much as against the condemned. You relied more on technique, on the years of learned precision, to compensate for your diminishing strength. The act of sharpening the axe, once a rhythmic meditation, was now a slow, deliberate struggle, your hands cramping around the stone. The world outside your hovel seemed to accelerate, even as your own life slowed to a crawl. News of distant wars and changing lords reached your ears, carried by traveling merchants or occasional intrepid visitors. The medieval world, though seemingly static, was in constant, albeit gradual, flux. Yet your place within it remained rigidly fixed, a permanent fixture of its darkest corner. You were an unchanging sentinel, watching the world pass by, waiting for your own inevitable end. A prominent academic debate among historians is the extent to which medieval individuals, particularly the ostracized, contemplated their own mortality and the afterlife. Did the constant proximity to death make them more or less religious? Did they find solace in the promise of heaven? Or did their grim work lead to a cynical view of divine justice? Some argue that the fear of eternal damnation for their unclean profession would have been overwhelming, while others suggest that their unique perspective might have fostered a more pragmatic, less dogmatic understanding of faith. It's like asking if a mortician is more or less afraid of death than the average person. Your only comfort, if it could be called that, was the silence. The silence of your hovel, broken only by the crackle of your meager fire. The silence of the condemned in their final moments, before the drop. The silence of the empty streets when you walked in the pre-dawn hours. It was a profound, almost spiritual quiet, a stark contrast to the cacophony of fear and judgment that had defined your youth. In this silence, you found a strange, grim peace, a detachment from the world that had always rejected you. You often found yourself sitting by the dying embers of your fire, watching the smoke curl upwards, thinking about the faces, not just the condemned, but the faces in the crowd, the faces of those who shunned you. You wondered if any of them had ever truly known what it was like, what it truly felt like, to wield the axe and to pull the lever, to be the instrument of another's final breath. You doubted it. Their judgments, you realized, were born of ignorance, of a fear they could only ever truly glimpse, never embody. The legacy you would leave was not one of wealth or family, or even a name remembered with respect. It would be the lingering fear, the chilling tales, the very function of the gallows that would continue long after your heart ceased to beat. You were a necessary evil, a tool of society, and like any tool, you would eventually wear out, to be discarded and forgotten. This grim truth, once a source of bitter despair, had now settled into a quiet acceptance. You were ready for your own final judgment, whenever it might come. You had lived a life of service to a brutal system, a life marked by isolation and the constant presence of death. There was no grand finale, no dramatic farewell, just the quiet fading of an old, weary man, the last flicker of a dying ember. The dawn of your final day would come, much like any other, bringing with it the same indifferent light, the same distant sounds of a world moving on, oblivious to the quiet departure of its long-serving shadow. The end came not with a flourish, nor with the dramatic clang of an executioner's axe, but with the quiet inevitability of a candle flickering out. You felt it coming, a gradual weakening that had nothing to do with hunger or obvious disease, but rather the slow, deliberate unraveling of a life lived too long on the fringes. Each morning, the effort to simply rise from your straw pallet became a monumental task. The cold seemed to seep deeper into your bones, refusing to be shaken off by the meager fire you could barely tend. Your walks to the town square, once a grim necessity, grew shorter, your steps more halting. The tools, once extensions of your will, now felt impossibly heavy in your aged, trembling hands. Sharpening the axe, that ritualistic communion with death, became an act of profound struggle, your breath coming in ragged gasps. The grim details of each impending execution no longer spurred the familiar, detached focus. Instead, they were met with a profound weariness, an overwhelming desire for it all to simply cease. Master Thorn's absence was a constant, aching void, yet you found a strange comfort in it. There was no one left to witness your decline, no one to inherit the burden of your profession. You had ensured that. The line of the executioner, and at least your branch of it, would end with you. It was a quiet victory, a final act of rebellion against the cruel fate that had bound you for so long. A common historical fact, often overlooked, is that medieval society, despite its brutalities, often viewed death not as an end, but as a transition. For the common person, particularly the pious, it was a gateway to the afterlife, a judgment before God. For you, however, your profession made such simple faith complicated. Could a man whose life was dedicated to taking others' lives truly expect grace? It's like trying to get into an exclusive club, but your lifelong profession is explicitly listed as a reason for immediate denial. The moments between executions stretched into a vast, empty expanse of time. You spent them mostly in your hovel, huddled by the fire, lost in contemplation. Memories, once sharp and visceral, now softened, blending into a hazy tapestry of faces, screams, and the omnipresent smell of damp earth. You thought about the young bread thief, the defiant rebel, the countless nameless faces. You remembered the feeling of the rope in your hands, the thud of the trapdoor, the collective gasp of the crowd. These were the touchstones of your existence, the grim milestones of a life defined by death. An obscure detail about the medieval mindset regarding the dead, even the executed, is that the belief in lingering spirits or unquiet dead was prevalent. Executioners, by dealing with bodies denied proper burial rites, might have been thought to be particularly susceptible to hauntings or spiritual misfortune. This added another layer of unseen burden to their already arduous and stigmatized role. Imagine ending your shift, but you also have to worry about ghost reception at your hovel. Just what you need after a long day. Right? The silence of your hovel became your only true companion. It was a deep, resonant quiet, broken only by your own shallow breathing, or the faint creak of the timbers in a strong wind. In this silence, you sought a kind of absolution, not from God, for you rarely prayed anymore, but from yourself. You tried to make peace with the choices you had been given, with the life you had been forced to live. You were a tool, you told yourself, an instrument of a brutal age. You had merely performed your function. A persistent academic debate among historians is the extent to which medieval individuals, particularly those in marginalized professions, held a sense of individual agency or believed themselves to be completely at the mercy of fate or divine will. Did you, the executioner's assistant, see yourself as a tragic figure trapped by circumstances, or as a necessary, if reviled, cog in the machinery of justice? Some scholars argue for a profound fatalism in a world dominated by external forces, while others emphasize the small, personal rebellions and acts of defiance that indicated a sense of self beyond imposed roles. It's like asking if you really want to do your job every day, or if you just feel like you have to because, well, bills. The world outside your hovel, once a source of endless threats, now seem to shrink, becoming less relevant with each passing day. The distant shouts from the market, the church bells tolling, the changing seasons, they were merely background noise to the internal process of your own slow, quiet dissolution. Your body, weakened by years of toil and meager sustenance, was simply giving out. The fire within you, a once fierce flame of survival, was now reduced to a few glowing embers, flickering faintly, ready to finally fade. One cold, gray morning, you awoke to an even deeper chill. The light filtering through your oiled hide window seemed dimmer, the air heavier. You tried to push yourself up, but your limbs felt like lead. The gnawing hunger, a lifelong companion, was oddly absent, replaced by a profound, pervasive weakness. You lay back, feeling the rough straw of your palate against your cheek, the familiar scent of damp earth and smoke filling your nostrils. The world began to recede, sounds growing faint, colors blurring. You saw images flash before your eyes, the stern face of Master Thorn, the wide, terrified eyes of the condemned, the silent, condemning faces of the crowd. You saw your own rough hands, stained with the invisible marks of your trade, and then a sense of peace, unexpected and profound, washed over you. The long journey, the brutal existence, the endless isolation, it was all coming to an end. There was no pain, no fear, just a quiet, gentle drifting. The executioner's assistant, the man who dealt in death, finally met his own. Not on the gallows, not by the sword, but quietly, anonymously, in the solitude of his hovel, just as he had lived. The final irony, perhaps, was that the end of your awful life was, at last, a peaceful one. And so we conclude this harrowing journey, an insight into a life that most of us can barely imagine. Imagine, as you curl up in your warm bed, surrounded by safety and comfort, that the life of a medieval executioner's assistant had none of those comforts, none of those moments of peace. Their lives were a series of lonely and fearful days, a burden they carried with them until their last breath. Now, you are out of the muddy streets, away from the smoky smell and bone-chilling cold of that era. Let the images of rough wooden bridges and cold eyes fade from your mind, giving way to the silence of the night. Take a deep breath. Feel the softness of your pillow, the warmth of your blanket. Everything is okay. You are safe. Now, you can truly find peace. Wishing you a deep and peaceful sleep.